Have now call on Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan as being the only opposition member present.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. With Deputy Catherine Murphy, we're the two independent TDs who are on the Constitutional Convention. And I must say, initially I thought it was going to be a very daunting process, and there was a very serious, very lengthy time commitment and a time constraint. But I would have to say, probably because of the organisation of the Constitutional Convention, it has proved a really worthwhile, a very positive experience. And while initially I might not have been totally positive about it, I certainly am much more so having taken part in it. And I know that both Deputy Murphy and myself have been there at each of the conventions, whereas I know within the parties there has been some change of personnel, but we have been there for each one of those weekends. Now, I know that it came from the government's programme for government, and it was interesting to look back at that, and the principles that you decided on was that it should be innovative, independent and influential. Well, I think it certainly has been innovative, and once it was established, I think it has shown its independence. And on the influential aspect, well, I think insofar as it can be, it has been, but that aspect will depend on how the government responds to the reports from the various meetings. There have been committees looking at reform, but the involvement of citizens, I think, is the one aspect that is very definitely a plus on the innovative side, and it is the first time in this state. I think great efforts were made to ensure that the citizens were representative of society generally, even though I do know that it wasn't 100% on that particular aspect. I know that when I spoke here on the 10th of July 2012, I was hoping that there would be balance: age, gender, socio-economic background, employment, unemployed, unemployed, urban, rural, Gaeltacht islands, new communities. And I made the point of the need to include young people proportionately, but I don't think that box was really ticked, and it was part of the debate here with the Taoiseach. And when we look at the extent of the youth population in this country, I think it is underrepresented. And I mean, I know we all think ourselves young, but I'm talking about people, say, who are under 24. I did express a fear that the 33 members of the Oireachtas and the 66 members of the citizens, that it could mean parliamentarians having an inordinate influence on the convention. Looking at the convention over the months that I've been there, I do think that parliamentarians do tend to dominate the proceedings, in spite of the best efforts of the chairman, who does say on occasions, well, if a member has spoken, well then please don't let that member speak again until other people have their opportunity to speak. But sometimes parliamentarians get in more often than citizens. I know some of us do keep to that: if you've spoken, you won't tend to dominate proceedings, but I don't think that's par for the course. I think you should leave some silences and let the citizen members speak more. I think citizen members have been particularly articulate at the table discussions and have been very open and very frank there on those ones, because we do know that there is a disconnect and a disaffection in the political system and a lack of interest in public representatives, and we see that in low voter turnout. And I do think that those parliamentarians who have taken a very active part in the Constitutional Convention, I think we probably have boosted the citizen perception of what it is that parliamentarians do. I had the honour of being the independent speaker at the opening of the Constitutional Convention in Dublin Castle, and one of the points I made there was that I think it's about our identity as a nation. And another point I was making was, I think sometimes we take our democracy for granted. You know, we have basic rights that people, especially women, don't have in other countries. And I think it's important that we do remember the freedoms that we have, of freedoms and rights to speech, to assembly, to education, and we have a free press. Fortunately, for another while anyway. We also have the right to amend our constitution, and just speaking as part of chairing the Irish section of OIPA, which involves African parliamentarians, we will have some African parliamentarians over to one of the convention weekends. They're coming from the countries of the Arab Spring, and I think it will be a very important opportunity for them to have a look at a constitutional convention in action. The technical group submission that we made the point of the need to strike the balance between those areas in need of reform, while protecting those parts of the Constitution which have been a solid foundation for realising our democratic, free and sovereign state. And I think it's important to remember also that as we are in the era of the decades of commemoration and commemorating those very defining moments in our history, that we acknowledge that the Constitution came out of the proclamation and the ideals of the 1916 Rising under both the tricolour and the starry plough. And it was about breathing free air together. It was about growing, changing and rising to all challenges, and I think there are plenty of challenges. I have to acknowledge and compliment the organisation of the convention, from the appointment of Tom Arnold as chairman, Art O'Leary as his right-hand person, all of the staff involved from the Oireachtas, and not just at the weekends of the convention, but also in preparation for the convention and after the convention as well, in writing up the reports. And one idea that did come from the group was the idea of having a steering group who would meet in between the meetings of the convention, and I think that has been very useful also. And again, to acknowledge the venue and the practical arrangements with the Grand Hotel in Malahide. And we'd have to say that there has been excellent service there. And I know work did go in to ensure value for money in terms of the budget available. It had been intended that one of the conventions would occur outside of Dublin, but when the staff from the convention went investigating this, the costs were really much higher than holding a convention in Dublin. And I think it was again part of the innovative aspect of the convention that they have come up with the idea of bringing the convention to various towns in Ireland, where they would have more citizen representatives would be able to come in and voice their opinions, and the citizen reps and from those particular areas would also have an opportunity. So I think we'll be getting out to people, to the country, what exactly is going on. The media, I think, have been a little bit hit and miss. I think they've certainly given a lot of coverage to certain aspects of the convention, but I do think they could give more coverage to the other ones that are not maybe as prominent or as, I don't know, media interest. One other point I'd like to make is that each of them to date, great work has gone in by the Oireachtas team to ensure balance in the various presentations on the topics. And I think it's very fair to say that with all of the submissions that they get, all of the offers that they get from various groups, etc., that I think they have done a great job to ensure that there is balance and to ensure that various voices are heard. Another point I'd like to make is that at the Sunday mornings, when there is a session while the votes are being counted, there's an opportunity for people to make points on what they felt was positive or areas that they felt could be improved. And in fairness to Tom and to Art and the team, they have been very proactive and very much engaged with taking on those particular suggestions. And out of those suggestions, there have been some changes. For example, I think it was probably at the first one that on the Sunday, even when the voting was going on or being counted, there were other presentations, which I think most of us felt would have been very useful if we'd had them before the voting. So that was taken on board, and then there were some changes for following constitutions. Just looking back at them, the topics, I know at the time the topics were announced that there was a lot of disappointment on the part of various people, myself included, at the narrow remit of the the convention. And I know that was part of the technical group submission on it, that there was an exclusion of certain topics that we felt were of vital importance in shaping the type of society in which we wish to live. And they would be economic rights, social rights and cultural rights. And I think housing and health would be of particular concern also. For me, I would like to see the rights and conditions of prisoners being looked at by the Constitutional Convention, and also the rights for people with disabilities, mental and physical. And I do hope that on the very last weekend that we'll have our usual frank and open discussion as to where the Constitutional Convention is going to go after there. And I think that would be very useful. And then looking back at the ones, I suppose we started off with a pretty non-contentious one, which is about the age, reducing the voting age to 17, and I heard what you said on that one, Minister, and the presidential term of office. I must say I was surprised, because I thought there would have been more of an interest in reducing it to 5 years, because my own personal opinion, and at the table that I was at, was that 7 years with another 7 years was very long. But we live in a democracy, and we know what the vote was. And I'd have to say on that it's very useful the way in which there's a lot of discussion on the nature of the ballot paper. And that goes on for quite a while. We get a draft one early Sunday morning, and then there's a discussion on that. And if there's a feeling that needs to be rejigged, retwigged, that's taken on board. And then there's a general agreement on what the ballot paper will look like. I do think it will be important that both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, and perhaps yourself, would make an appearance at the Constitutional Convention at some stage before it finishes. When it came to the presidential election, I would have to acknowledge that when we were just debating that, the chairman was pretty open about looking at the nomination process for president, particularly for those people who are independent, and I think that was important. When it came to the Dáil reform, Dáil electoral system, there was a lot of disquiet on the part of some people that it was too narrow. and that it was only looking at one particular area in need of reform, whereas I think there were a lot of people there who would have liked to have seen it covering an awful lot more areas. And it was very hard to understand why Senate reform wasn't being discussed at the Constitutional Convention. And I know some of the senators went to great efforts to try and have it included. Now, okay, I understood where the chairman was coming from. He allowed their views to be expressed. But I do think a real opportunity was lost there. And I hope it's not because the government had made up its mind that that's the done deal, that the Senate is going, because I do think that's a shame that here was an opportunity for citizens of the country to give their opinion on that as well, before going immediately into a referendum on it. I would have to say that the weekend on the provision for same-sex marriage was one of the most emotive and I wouldn't even use the word challenging, but I thought it was really great to have been there on that particular weekend and to have heard the speeches coming from people who are directly affected by the fact that we didn't have equality in marriage. And what it confirmed, I think, for me and for others there was that it was very much confirming and affirming the value of marriage, because other people wanted to be involved in marriage as well. And I think being at that particular one, it was one of those moments that you'll think, well, where was I when that was, discussed and decided? And it was very good to have been there. The one on the women, greater participation of women in public life, and that, I don't think that just amending the Constitution is really going to bring about any great change on that. So we have 2 more to go, I think it is, and then the weekend of looking at further ways. I'd have to say that it has been a very positive experience, and I think the parliamentarians who are there are certainly doing their best to show that we're not really the waste of space that so many people think we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.